From where she said. I see others are from Boston and Luxembourg, Florida. Wow. Okay, in Alaska. So thanks for joining, everyone. I'm also a fellow HKS graduate, like our speaker, so I'm really happy to be here. Okay. Um, so I just wanted to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. But before we do that, I did want to have two more icebreakers as we're having a few more people trickle in. Um, so if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why? If you could go ahead and type your response. Bob Marley. Nice. Good answer. Mother Teresa. Abraham Lincoln. Actually, that's what I would have put down. Well, my favorite museum is the Lincoln Museum, Presidential Museum in Springfield, Illinois. Um, so Springfield, Illinois is um, the southern tip of the state of Illinois. My uncle used to live near it, so I've been to it 3 times. It's pretty incredible. Another respond. Okay, yeah, what someone else said Abraham Lincoln too. Paul Revere, Lyndon Johnson. Well, thank you so much for your responses. And then one more icebreaker question for everyone. What inspires you to be part of global development? Whether it's as an admirer or if you're an actual practitioner of global development, what inspires you to be a part of this community? The urgent need of world peace, reducing inequality in healthcare, the networking. Yes. Responsibility to the next generation. Yes. Very good answers. I have to be careful using the word development outside of the world of international development because it also means fundraising. So I'm glad folks here know the difference. Okay, global energy and policy. Yes. Responsibility, of course, to the next generation. Understanding the role of culture and ramifications for global growth. And someone wrote, Lo Yang wrote, I've lived and worked in very different countries and cultures and see a lot of gaps that could be filled and improved. I want to learn the best way to approach and take actions to drive changes for making things better for everyone. All right. Well, thank you so much for your responses. Okay. And Andrew just wrote, practitioner enjoys trying to help others in support of global public goods. Very good. Thank you for your responses. Okay. Well, let's get started. So again, my name is Ladan Fakhouri. I also I'm a public servant, and I have a background working at state USAID, NSC, OMB, DHS, and I went to the Kennedy School. I graduated in 2015. It's my honor to introduce our guest, Ms. Melissa Zhang. She's the principal at Azimuth. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yes.
Capital management. I actually listened to the pronunciation before I came on, just to be sure. Azimuth Capital Management and co-founder of the carbon mineralization startup RockFix, where she served as its chief operating officer, leading commercialization with miners and fundraising. She was previously a strategist at Google X for an electric grid moonshot and an investor at BlackRock, where she managed low carbon transition portfolios and hedge funds. Ms. Zhang holds a dual Bachelor of Science in Environment and Finance from the University of California, Berkeley. She earned her MBA from Stanford and her MPA from Harvard, where she was winner of the Harvard President's Innovation Prize and a John F. Kennedy Scholar. Ms. Zhang, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
Uh,
Ladon.
yeah, thank you for being with us. And you're Melissa, where are you joining us from?
I'm in San
What's
Francisco, so I notice a few of you in my time zone.
yeah. Okay, perfect. Um, well, before working as the COO of RockFix and becoming one of the nation's leading experts in renewable energy policy, climate ventures, and climate risk disclosure, you were a young girl with big ambitions to support in some capacity. Talk to us about how your upbringing got you to where you are today.
Well, first, thank you for the very kind introduction, and I'm really grateful that everyone chose to spend your morning, or it sounds like evening, afternoon, with us here. Um, I love this question, and I've do think about it a lot, especially in times of crossroads in my personal or professional life. My biggest influences, I think, really do start from childhood. I was born in Sichuan province, the home of panda exports in China, raised in Hong Kong, and a two-time immigrant, first to Hong Kong in the 90s and then to the US in the recent decades. I've been fortunate to have very strong role models in my parents. One is still a professor to this day, and the other is a stay-at-home mom turned entrepreneur. So I think I've been surrounded by, tiger love, but also a very strong work ethic, people who are very kind. And I think this mindset of even though they were putting in everything they could into kind of this my leaning middle upper class, to be frank, in my teenagehood upbringing. I think while they didn't always feel like they got everything back from what they put in. There was always this mindset of kind of whatever kindness and hard work you put in, it will come back to you at some point. And I've been very touched to see that for my father as kind of his posse of mentees all developed into very accomplished academics and mentors for the next generation. So I think this feeling of I do have a responsibility to the next generation, and with the resources that I have been endowed with, is remains a strong source of motivation and yeah, a driving force in my life today. In terms of worldview and why I'm working on the energy transition and investments, I think I had a fairly, at least looking back now, an interesting viewpoint growing up in Hong Kong, or what's called the Pearl River Delta, kind of where a bunch of rivers converge and flow into the South China Sea. Because from the late 90s to the early 2010s, I really saw this huge triangulation. And if you work in development in this seminar, you'll relate, I think, where you see this massive economic growth. You know, people's GDP per capita are multiplying by 4x to 5x in a span of less than 20 years. But I also saw poverty reduction and just growing pollution from industrialization really with my own eyes. And I saw a report that, the I think it was the World Bank called the Pearl River Delta kind of the most polluted place in East Asia back in the 2000s. Now, this naturally gave me an early interest in the intersection of economic development and also environmental protection, which I took with me when I moved to the United States for college, none other than at UC Berkeley, kind of this historical spearhead of progress and, free speech, but also kind of this awakening in the Bay Area where I was first exposed to on a comparative basis, huge technology innovation and also huge capitalism, ironically, kind of from the nest of Berkeley. So I'm still based here in the Bay 15 years from today, later. And I think my work post undergrad across BlackRock, across a Bill Gates funded startup, and now doing later stage investing in a firm that has started out with oil and gas roots has, I think it all has been a journey that's interlinked, but giving me evolving perspectives on the role of capital policy, and of course through an education at the Kennedy School, where development fits in all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate hearing like how your upbringing has connected you to your career aspirations. What are the most significant public policy shifts you've seen this year as it relates to your work? Here in DC, we have gone through a seismic shifts since inauguration. So it's interesting to hear how it might be on the other side of the United States.
Sure. And I was just in DC about 3 weeks ago. Actually paid a visit to some friends in Capitol Hill. I think the narrative is quite consistent on both sides of the coast. Um, my short answer for the theme of the year is really this return to energy security. And you can actually read all about it in the latest Foreign Affairs magazine, where Jason Bordoff and Megan O'Sullivan penned a piece literally called The Weaponization of Energy. It's a great piece, and I think our firm Azimuth made a call on this return earlier in the year, given the new administration, and I have certainly seen it play out in the way we design our investment thesis, as well as the proliferation of companies that have risen up to meet this theme of pragmatism. So, what does it actually mean? Now, the question that was asked is public policy shift. I would just caveat that I am seeing or I am observing the world from the standpoint of an investor who's been very lucky to work with geopolitical advisors, the key one being Greenmantle, founded by Neil Ferguson. So I'm commentating from a unique standpoint here. Um, so return to pragmatism. Now, I really wish I took Megan O'Sullivan's class when I was at HKS. I was back in business school that specific semester, but if you're a student, you absolutely should. And it's really focused on the geopolitics of energy. I think as a student who entered the energy transition investing world with, and I still hold this mission close to heart, the goal of decarbonizing the planet with capital and with good investments. What I've learned in the last 2 to 3 years is that you really cannot decouple decarbonization from energy security, because the bread and butter of the business is to produce and construct molecules and electrons that power national, regional, provincial economies. That is intrinsically linked with politics and economic development. And so the benefits of producing low carbon varieties of hydrocarbons, lower carbon varieties of electrons, I think there's general consensus that that is good for human health, conditional on the fact that your security and affordability objectives are not compromised. Um, I think what I've seen is, with this trifecta of affordability, security, and sustainability, we've gone through 4 to 5 years where we had a government that seemed to push the sustainability lever to the higher up on the priority list. But we have now moved back into a world where, unsurprisingly, in my view, security still comes to the top with affordability not far behind. So I do see that kind of rotation in this energy trilemma that has come back to influence federal government policy. That being said, I still hold optimism that the private sector, especially the big buyers of this energy, such as the hyperscalers today, um, it's so I want to give an example. Some countries, so moving into the public sector, I think has always planned economic policy with energy security extremely top of the list. One of them is Japan, which imports most of the world's, a good chunk of the world's LNG because they're not a resource producing country. I have visited one of the 45 or so LNG terminals on the coast of Japan, and it's quite a magnificent sight to watch a ship that has sailed from, Australia, maybe the Gulf. Actually, there's still very active projects in Sakhalin in Russia because it's the closest journey to the Japanese coast. And you watch this unload flow into a power plant and supply literally something like a third of the Tokyo citizens' electricity. That is to me a picture of security and affordability. Without that, cities don't function, and you and I are not going to be on any Zoom calls talking about our ideals. But that being said, the government of Japan has been very proactive in procuring lower carbon versions of LNG. And that actually has undergirded some of our investments from a couple of years ago, producing decarbonized ammonia and hydrogen, which are replacement energy carrier and production molecules that's shipped from the Gulf Coast to Japan. That having that buyer in place willing to pay for these molecules is required. And in the Japanese case, some $20 billion of subsidies were issued in order to support this low carbon procurement. Now, I think looking at the United States this year, the move towards public policy looks like this. It looks like canceling projects and grants that were deemed and this is, subjective depending on how you measure, deemed wasteful, such as the hydrogen and direct air capture hubs, and rediverting those resources into, we could call it more proven or favored technology sectors, such as geothermal and other baseload non-intermittent power resources, as well as a ton into AI infrastructure to kind of fan the flames in this race for artificial general intelligence. You could have a whole other webinar on that, as well as other forms of kind of self-sufficiency in the world of critical minerals, which go into essential supply chains in both defense and advanced semiconductors. So I'll pause with that's kind of the world that we as investors see policy create. Our question to ourselves is really, and I think what's interesting is, I just hopped off some due diligence calls with companies is, do we want to invest in, or if you were a company, do you want to become the next MP Materials? And I think there are some really interesting pros and cons. There's no perfect answer about this shift into kind of state entrepreneurialism with kind of American characteristics, a nod to the state-owned enterprise system in China. But I do think industrial policy has really shifted from being a reaction to this supply chain risk crisis 5 to 10 years ago to, okay, we need to actually do more than reshore and build up the US manufacturing ecosystem. So if there's anyone in the audience kind of working in climate investing or at any early, mid, late stage today, I think I would be really surprised if your thesis isn't also more closely tied to the national security theme.
Melissa, let me just ask you one follow-up question. Because I have worked in the State Department Office of Foreign Assistance, where I've coordinated the energy, climate, food security budgets. The shift I'm also seeing, and the US is really behind on this, is to nuclear. Are you seeing that as well? Because there aren't, in terms of 24/7 clean energy, you mentioned geothermal, and I'm just wondering how um, how practical it is to shift into the nuclear space.
This is the perennial question of, is nuclear 10 years away, and is it still 10 years away 10 years from now? Our firm prefers not to take the technology risk and commercial scale-up risk associated with nuclear until there are further proof points of regulatory burdens being reduced. So we're not kind of the most prolific, I think, nuclear investors in the field. We are visiting and contemplating the small modular reactor space. And we've seen some companies that have produced technological breakthroughs that enable more efficient nuclear fusion reactions. But the question I would, when we get asked by the hyperscalers for our power portfolio company is, what is your time to power? And I think if you were talking to nuclear producers, anything before 2030, I would be somewhat skeptical. And at capacity, anything kind of in the hundreds of megawatts before 2030, I would also be skeptical. Um, and this is a really difficult, I think, situation of investments into a public good. This is a clean baseload power that has huge potential at high capacity, versus uh, could we spend the money better elsewhere? And here I'm thinking there's a French project that's been around for 25 years, and the cost overruns haven't stopped for 25 years. There's also incredible teams at Commonwealth Fusion and other big players that where over $2 billion of investor capital has already sunken in, but with no offtake or interconnection into a local utility. So there are huge costs to innovation. And I think I'm still working on my ethics framework of at what point is that money just better spent elsewhere on systems and technologies that are more proven and ready to go. So it's a difficult one to answer. And I'm just not an expert enough to give you a very clear answer on where I'm most bullish in this space.
No, thank you for sharing. Um, so you have this very your the work you're doing in your background is kind of hitting venture capitalism, tech, and academia. Um, Given how interdisciplinary your interests and background is, um, how has that shaped your leadership style?
Oh, thank you for this question. Um, I do love working in an interdisciplinary field, and I think it reflects on the way I think. And I think many, Harvard alumni and just many people think because we are of multiple dimensions, and no problem is just black and white. Uh, I could maybe talk about some common threads that have threaded the different disciplines where I've worked, and also how this has shaped my leadership style. So maybe just common threads in my different kinds of work, from institutional investing at BlackRock to building a startup, to now working in private equity. I think the through line is really three things. I think a world-class team makes all the difference. For me, it's just critical to be in that environment, to do my best work. And I truly believe that I'm the average of the five people I spend the most time with, whether in my personal or professional life. So, growing that and nurturing those relationships are huge for me. And then across all these disciplines, I think I've seen the different faces, functions, and forms of capital. Capital looks very different from cradle, which is your startup, to kind of middle age in the public markets. And then, I haven't really worked in the grave, which is bankruptcy, though I have looked at deals that are in bankruptcy, and we're deciding whether to put in a bid to purchase specific divisions of this company in the electricity space. But I find it super interesting as someone who cares about leveraging capital for good on how is this stuff moved around? Why do people pay me to move it around? And what are the outcomes I produce by investing in specific companies? Um, yeah, and then another through line is really actually those are the two main ones. I think in terms of leadership style, uh, I I would just say that being interdisciplinary is really critical to making good decisions. Um, I think holding conflicting viewpoints and being able to reconcile those trade-offs, not just in my own head, but being able to articulate them and influence and persuade people around me, is really important. there's kind of an art and a science to, how assertive or how, accommodating one can be in facilitating those conversations, even deciding whether to initiate one in a certain difficult moment, and how you close those conversations. Those are all, I think, areas in my leadership that I am working on because there are just some times where one needs to be more decisive than others, in the name of making sure your team is making progress and not wasting resources. The last piece that I would, or I guess advice I would give to myself coming out of the last years of experience is really focusing on incentives. Whatever organization I walk into or I'm, conducting diligencing on, I'm really asking like best outcomes for whom. So one example is, as a private equity firm, we have several portfolio companies and we share the boards of those companies with other players who are also investors. Um, and when your fellow investors are bringing in capital at different stages of the company's growth with different governing rights, different priorities, we're all going to have, frankly, conflicts of interest in when we want to enter and exit a company. And we need to really work together and, frankly, think beyond ourselves to put the best interests of the company in mind. So that's kind of a real trade-off that I've seen occur. And I've also seen more experienced mentors kind of approach these challenges in different ways. And it's just a fascinating place to kind of learn. I have so many examples, also when I look at policy, such as all these 45V, QZ, whatever tax credits written to incentivize clean energy investment. I do think about, these were written by really smart people, and I'm so lucky to know a lot of them through Kennedy, who are now working Capitol Hill, for various purposes, where they were also balancing trade-offs of security versus environmental protection versus maybe interests I'm not even aware of. And talking to recently some colleagues in the battery space, they were telling me about I think it's the either GM or Ford a joint venture with CATL, which is the electric battery supplier to Tesla, but also I think it's on the foreign entities of concerns list. And what I learned is that the car manufacturers based in the US, American companies, had to go lobby to get specific language written out of the 45, I think, X tax credit to make sure that they can actually build their EV plant in the US. So I think in the clean tech space, I see a lot of those sticky situations come up where the intended policy doesn't actually match what would help our investments that frankly, A, generates returns and B, ensures the manufacturing skill set is being reverse kind of sent back to this country. We need to make sure that's actually happening, and it doesn't always align with the tax credits we see in practice. But I'll make a huge caveat that most of the investments we make, we don't want to rely on those tax credits anyways. We don't want to have to be in a position to ask, are we the next MP materials? So yeah, I think my lifelong battle as a leader will be balancing really this idealism and pragmatism in my work. And I hope that however that manifests in my work, which is really the amalgamation of my relationship with people, I hope it will always, it will never sacrifice integrity or kindness in what we do. But that's just the difficulty of being a leader. And I foresee much bigger challenges to come in my career. And I hope that I'll be willing to listen and ask for help when those situations arise.
Thanks, Melissa. I really respect that you enjoy working and you're drawn to working in interdisciplinary field, and I appreciate that you also have a lot of humility in saying how much you rely on learning from others, which um, also shows that you're a lifelong learner from just how dynamic your um, both your current career is, but also how you got to where you are. Um,
Thank you.
Yeah. And before I go to the next question, I know I'm seeing Lo Yang is posting a few questions. Please feel free to input your questions into the chat so that we can um, uh, draw on some of them for the Q&A at the end. Um, Melissa, what surprises you the most about your job? Anything you expected differently before entering the sector you're in?
Yeah, thank you. Certainly surprises, I think can be good or bad. The number one thing I've taken away is really, at least in the investments business, you really want to guard your reputation as an expensive asset. At risk of revealing my role as a Swiftie, what she has said, Taylor Swift has said is, your energy is expensive, and I want to say your reputation is expensive. Um, I think I've seen situations where I would not want to be the person that has made certain decisions, but it happens in the professional world. So I really put integrity above everything else and who I want to work with and kind of who I want to work for. Now, the second and third maybe observations or surprises is I think the good news I have for folks who want to work in clean tech or just any social driven sector like healthcare, and there's so many. I think manufacturing helps society. Um, Helping pensioners, invest helps society. But it comes down to this high fits model of leadership, which is kind of where do I fit? Because there's just so many ways of entering the sphere. So let's say looking at clean tech investing, um, you could kind of, the questions I asked myself was I could be in this early stage world. I could be in growth. I could be in infrastructure. I could go work for somebody else's dream in their company, go through, GM's leadership rotation program. And I knew from early on I wanted to stay in investing. But the question then is, you know, if the idea of finding three winners out of a portfolio of 40 or 100 companies sounds wasteful, like that is venture. You have to be comfortable with that and believe that that business model works and is good for the world. And I think living in San Francisco, surrounded by many incredible venture investing friends, I think you have to do some reflection on whether that makes sense for you. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to scale up, a new invention that, let's say, makes cement in a greener way, I think it it matters, but it also doesn't matter unless you can scale it up to an industrial scale and like build big projects. But that takes a long time, and the question then you have to ask yourself is, do I have the patience to kind of see this project through? Because it will take more than 10 years to see results, right? Even if this is a very impactful project on the world. Now, the third piece of surprise is I think when I worked at BlackRock and I was staring at my Bloomberg screen all day, and I just really wanted to get in the field and see what public-private collaboration really looked like. So that was why I left a predictable but wonderful career and team to go back to graduate school. And I'm quite pleased to see from my time with Azimuth so far and our work with all kinds of clean tech companies that I do think public-private collaboration is real. And whoever is, in the White House, literally this morning, I'm hearing from management teams that are being invited to go and do interagency work. I think that government, public-private collaboration is alive and well for the verticals that are in favor. And if you're in minerals refining, production, nuclear, AI, like this is your chance. I think those startups and companies should kind of leverage the bandwagon and do the most they can, even if it's at the expense of certain subsectors that unfortunately are just not less in favor. And you may have to find markets outside of the US to grow your business. Um, my I guess one concern is I think no amount of mutual due diligence from the private sector or the government completely removes risk from either party. But that's the case kind of in the private sector as well. And we just have to be comfortable knowing like who is signing our contract on the other side. And I think in most cases, yeah, a public-private collaboration is a good sign of society working well to achieve outcomes that either sector can't do alone.
Thanks so much for being so frank about your experiences. This is a little bit more personal to maybe any of us here. We would never advertise publicly or but as you've mentioned, you've taken a lot of risk and you have to be comfortable with risk. Have you ever faced a career setback? And if so, and I'm sure the answer is yes, but how did you overcome it?
Certainly. I'm actually really glad I had this experience, which I'm about to share, because it was very formative, which is when my co-founders and I split up for our startup Rockfix about uh, two years ago now. Um, this was I think in any startup journey, you kind of you hope to ride the high until the very end, like boom, IPO. Maybe it takes you 3 years if you're in AI, maybe like 10 years or longer if you're in clean tech. But what I've learned from this experience is that, the source of our conflict, and it was really me and my CTO versus the other guy, we didn't quite negotiate a cap table that fully reflected the value that we each brought to the table at the beginning. And my advice to founders kind of who are trying to be an entrepreneur is, if you have that idea that makes you burn and you have whether it's the experience or the belief in each other, you should absolutely give it a try. But unless one of you is bringing the capital or one of you has built and exited a company before, you're really all starting from a similar starting point, and you shouldn't compromise on the value that reflects your contributions on your cap table. So we reached a point where two of us this just didn't feel right, and we were seeing behavior we didn't want to see from a trusted partner. So we all walked away from the table. And I think the surprise for me, when I was feeling like I had totally failed on the other side, I was thinking, man, I have this spreadsheet of, over 50 venture investors and, President Larry Bacal, they all know I'm working on this project. It's so embarrassing that I'm no longer doing this. Um, I realized the investors who I trusted and had built up good relationships with, and they've seen me do my work for the last 2 years. The first phone call was really, how can I help? And would you like to meet five other PhDs trying to find a co-founder? Or would you like to come work for one of my 50 portfolio companies? So those phone calls made a huge difference. I think to this day, if I can help those men and women in my ecosystem, I always try, because you just don't forget when people support you through these pivotal and painful career setbacks. And I think thanks to that experience, I've also normalized, hey, like whether it's a co-founder split or these kinds of setbacks, they're super normal. I mean, ideally, you don't go through enough that it takes a toll on your mental health, but it really resets, kind of what I internally and externally validate myself for. And I think here I just thought the external validation had collapsed and needed some internal kind of soul searching, and then realized, oh, like there's still people who value my work. Yeah, and then B, I think it just brings you to what you're meant to do, because I do have more empathy for the management teams we work with. I really do my best not to waste their time in the context of what our fund is able to or not collaborate on. So it's all, oh yeah, and my sourcing network is really trusted founders who we used to all go pitch at the same competitions and conferences. And now I'm kind of on the other side and being humbled by the data rooms and pitches of companies that really knew a lot better about what they were doing than myself 2 years ago. But I think these lessons all kind of snowball and compound into each other. So don't let rejections or a setback kind of um, it's not a reflection of your worth. And if there are mistakes, I think own it and move on.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And um, just to piggyback on what you're sharing, I appreciate you saying that you're in touch with folks that would com you would do competitions with. So for those who might be in their who are early stage founders and trying to move from lab scale innovation to real world deployment, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. Um, I'd say surround yourself with the best team that you can find. And if you're a solo founder, don't let yourself take on all the roles and responsibilities that you really should have delegated 6 months ago. I think, you know, whether you're the inventor or the CEO, the energy and support of the people around you is going to make a huge difference as you take an invention from lab to a pilot, to a demonstration facility, to a fingers crossed commercial facility. That would be my short advice.
Thank you. And then last question before we move to Q&A. So if you guys have questions, please put it in the chat. Um, What's a book, podcast, or resource that has influenced your professional journey? So during this discussion, I've heard Ronald Heifetz's adaptive leadership model came up. So I know many of us have taken his class, some have not. And then I I heard that Taylor Swift has also influenced your career, but that may not be the answer to this question. So I leave it to you to give the one book, podcast, or resource that you would point to.
um, I love reading and I love podcasts, so it's really hard to choose a favorite. So I might just go with what I've been listening to recently. If you haven't found Tiger Sisters, this is a podcast that my classmates at the Stanford, Cherie Lowe and her sister, Jean, have started not too long ago. And the specific demographic that they are targeting are kind of women in their teens to their 30s. But what I think is really cool is that they are a top three Spotify business podcast, and they're the only female hosts out of the top 20 business podcasts on Spotify. So I think there's a gap that they're definitely filling, and the public is needs. But they talk about their themes are kind of money, power, and love. And I think there's just really good, frank conversation they had. The most recent one was with the late Jack Welch's wife, Dr. Susie Welch, about kind of finding your own values. And then book, one that has really stuck in my head recently is The Thinking Machine by Stephen Witt. This is Jensen Huang's kind of biography. I'm sure there's multiple written about him. Another one's called the NVIDIA Way, but given this is a $5 trillion company today, that's more than Alphabet and Meta stacked together, which is insane. I think it's relevant to any reader working on any supply chain to understand the roots of this company. And I was certainly surprised by, I guess, the power of gaming in starting their first chips, but also that the first customers of their kind of earlier parallel computing uh, uh, equipment were actually professors. They found that they needed a customer kind of willing to pay anything to make huge breakthroughs. And that was actually the academia sector, which I thought was so strange, but also made sense. Yeah, and then I was also, you'll be surprised how early on, like Jensen had bet on AI and just the ruthless grit that's grown the company into what many call the OPEC of chips today. So that's a really good read.
Great, thank you so much. All right, everyone, I just wanted to go ahead and shift to Q&A and give an opportunity to those of you who are listening. And I'd love for if it doesn't have to be me that you don't have to hear my voice, reading everyone's questions. So if you don't mind unmuting, Feel free to ask one of your two questions and we'll come back to your second one.
Okay, hi. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to add the first question. I'm also from Chengdu, I born there, so I was really surprised to hear that. Yeah, so the first question I asked, because I work in tech, the very high energy consumption with quickly growing AI industry has been one of the hot topics in the tech. So how does the energy industry see this? How do you view the impact?
Thank you, Lo. So the question is, what's the impact of energy on AI and tech?
Yes, yes. I only see it from the tech industry, but I want to know how do you see it from the energy industry impact of AI?
Yes, huge. So the way I summarize this is for the conferences that I attended in 2025, and I went to at least 10, which maybe is too many, spoke on most of them, is that at energy conferences we go to, um, it's all about AI. And then at
Wow.
yeah, so it's but I think the point of leverage is interesting. It's less what can the AI industry do for energy, and it's more what can the energy industry do for AI?
Mm-hmm.
Because the traditional hyperscalers, they have become the biggest energy, you could call it procurers, or even like in some ways energy companies, period, in the industry. Uh, and so I think if you worked in energy procurement in a Google 10 years ago, you are way more influential this year than you were 10 years ago, because
Just a ship on
there's an imperative that there is sufficient compute and
it. Mm-hmm.
relevant energy infrastructure to support these breakthroughs that, frankly, put bluntly, validate shareholder valuations. It's a little bit crass to put it that way, but I think that's the short story.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest bottleneck to compute is power.
Yeah.
Without, um, frankly, multi-gigawatts of power to power whether it's training or inference data centers, you can't run the models that push you to become the best performing hyperscaler. Now, NVIDIA has even come up with we do talk to them as a firm, a separate word for this new class of hyperscalers solely focused on AI, aka the neo clouds. So these are kind of like your CoreWeave and more AI focused players. So the question as a power developer is really, uh, which technologies do we select, and how do we most quickly interconnect these projects to the grid? And actually, I've seen a lot of plays where either investors or developers purchase existing real estate and sites that are already interconnected to the grid, and then
Mm-hmm.
retrofit that into a power generation site, just because this is such a hot business to be in right now.
Thank
Thank
you.
thank you so much. Um, I see a question from Vassos. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question? I don't have to, again, read it, but I'm happy to. Okay, I will, in case Vassos can't come off mute. Has written, what I learned from MIT and HKS is that fundamental technological innovation ultimately shapes the policy agenda, often with a delay that sharp venture capitalists can anticipate and champion. Such work is not needed to resolve the energy challenges. Oh, sorry, such work is now needed to resolve the energy challenges. My opinion is that the solution is in the affordable energy storage. Do you agree or disagree?
So I think on the premise that high tech drives policymaking, I think that's absolutely true. And history shows that most frontier technology actually precedes regulation, in the same way that uh, not necessarily just the US, but global governments are trying to come up with a governance framework for AI models, or that one just really dominates in my head. Now, low carbon energy storage, I think, is one solution among many solutions in the energy space. I think the US is in a particularly unique position because we have become a net natural gas exporter. There's debate on whether gas is a fossil fuel or not, but if the incentive is for these gas companies to succeed, then you are going to see more incentives, which we see in real life with President Trump asking or requesting other nations such as Europe to buy more American power. That's LNG, that's natural gas. But we're not really seeing as much asks of, buy American energy storage. That's actually more of a China game right now in the battery and energy BESS space. So I think I've read some interesting articles about, the so-called electro state that's popping up more in the East, and then these like molecule and fossil states that are popping up in the West, where you are net exporters of natural gas. So whether that's a concern depends on, again, where you are in the ecosystem. If you're a Texas gas company, this is great. If you're an environmental NGO, this might not be great. And I've met some really bright folks in philanthropies who are trying to find ways to do more collaboration between these electro states and net gas states. And I think if you were kind of a small nation in between whose goal is to increase your, energy imports and electricity access to raise standards of living, you're probably going to want a mix of both. So it really depends on where you stand in this world.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks.
Thanks. Javier has a question. Did you want to come off mute and ask it?
Sure, yeah, I can ask. Hey, Melissa, thank you so
Hi.
much. Very insightful stuff. But hey, let me ask you this. So, what policy barriers or incentives do you think most determine whether emerging energy techs actually scale beyond pilot projects? And beyond that, how do you see that scalability actually reaches those mostly underserved communities or areas?
Yeah, thank you for the questions, Javier. So there's two questions there. One is policy barriers, and I think two is underserved communities.
Right.
The biggest barrier is lack of predictability. I know that's not a specific policy, but when we underwrite investments, our fund, as an example, is looking at call it 5 to 8 year returns timeframe. I've seen platforms with a 25-year timeframe. I think that's great. You're much more patient, and family offices have an endowments go into perpetuity. But time is the enemy, because if we are not able to underwrite our expected cash flows back within the next 5 to 8 years, because the 45 Z or V low carbon fuels tax credit is set to expire maybe next year. Oh, actually, it's the year after. We'd rather just not write a check in that space because it's too unpredictable. So it has been, we do get questions of concern about our portfolio companies that, like, do you rely on the 45, hydrogen tax credit? Those are all real concerns. And if only we have more predictability, which is difficult, I think, in
Right.
this great democracy, that some things just won't change for 10 years. That would make life a lot easier. But this also applies for regulation, such as in Europe with sustainable aviation fuels. I think there's just a constant fear that the required mix into jet fuel is going to change. But so far, the biggest deals that I've seen signed in that space are all in Europe, because there's just slightly more predictable regulation for who will buy this stuff. Yeah, and then underserved communities and markets. I will admit I care a lot about making a difference in that field, but it doesn't reflect as much in my day-to-day work, which is very North America, so US and Canada focused. But I will say that we've had the privilege to talk to many, companies that are building in very rural areas in the US and Canada. And they've told us that, I think in the Biden administration, this would have been called your community benefits agreement. I respected how the DOE made that a mandatory part of applying for loans or grants. Now, today, while that's no longer mandatory, these companies still tell us you know what, we're more competitive than our competitor XYZ because we go in there and offer to build like their local Wi-Fi in places where there's no Wi-Fi. Or we require whenever our engineers fly through this state to go to our site and build, they have to go to the local state universities and give a lecture about what we're building in the area. So yeah, exactly. I think social responsibility, interestingly, is a competitive lever. I love that to actually see it in practice, even though it's not regulated.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Melissa, I hope it's okay. I'm keeping you a few more minutes. We'll wrap up in the
No problem.
next minutes. Okay. Thank you so much. I apologize for others, but thank you for staying on past 1 o'clock. There's a question from Andrew. It's actually a very interesting question. Andrew, do you want to come off mute to ask it?
Sure. First, thank you so much, Melissa. And it goes a little bit to what you were just saying on sort of underserved communities. But I'm curious what your thoughts are about the developing world, in quotes. But how does this ultimately translate? Because the World Bank, where I used to be at, is now currently has a big energy focus in Africa in particular, sort of energizing Africa. And so how do you see this? Again, acknowledging as you said, mostly in North America, but how do you see this sort of clean energy tech ultimately translating to the developing world, and what's the best way to do that? Just some thoughts if you have.
Way to end on a very difficult question.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I actually started a Google Doc just to copy and paste random thoughts I have or great extracts of articles others have written about this very topic, because I think a lot about, frankly, what the world is missing from this gap in US-China collaboration on clean tech. There are some colleagues I speak with on a regular basis just to discuss this topic. That's completely not in our day-to-day work. If I had to begin with first principles, I think it comes back to the trifecta of security, affordability, and sustainability concerns that each player with the pocketbook to either export or import those technologies, how they prioritize between those three. I definitely don't do a ton of work in Africa, but I know of colleagues who, especially in the critical minerals space, have either, represented their firm with, let's say, government relations in the Congo when it comes to cobalt, or are still going out there, members of the Japanese government to actively invest in mining interests so that they could kind of smooth out their entire supply chain from the upstream to the downstream. I think the theme of what I hear is that, and a lot of you in this call would know much more than I do working in developing nations, these governments care about, frankly, affordability and human development more than anything else. The Congo has 90 million mouths to feed. And so there is, and this is anecdotal, kind of an expectation that the first X 100 million or even billion, if you're a huge corporate, that is generated from your sites here, it's going to go to the local government. Whether that feels fair or not depends, again, on kind of where you stand. And then the rest of the, let's say, commodity profits could maybe go to the foreign company that came. Now, whether that company is Swiss, American, Chinese, there is an element of how much training are you bringing here, and also how long is your checklist for what the locals have to do in order to let you operate here. So it's really hard. And I think where I would like to have further education is about actually this concept of dumping, right? Because if one country manages, when this is China, subsidizes the production of solar and batteries and EVs to the extent that it is the cheapest in the world, yes, I think flooding another country's market is not good. But also, I do think about kind of for whom and what other goals are being accomplished. Like if you are sending this stuff to a country that actually wants to be able to buy all those panels at a lower price, is that necessarily a bad thing? Controlling to what extent that is kind of a dumping practice. So I just don't think I know enough about the intricacies of trade to get to the bottom of that argument. But I think I've heard enough from, there's a bit of an echo chamber in the climate investing community in the US right now where uh, every investment is about reducing reliance on China and making sure you're exporting, AI for democracy to other countries. So kind of my question is kind of if you were the country on the receiving side, I just think you have a different calculus for what matters the most, and all of that will be predicated on price. Um, so it's tricky, and I think having seen having done a lot of customer discovery and market research in the minerals space, uh, you are more competitive if you're able to secure a more vertically integrated supply chain, meaning you own interests in a mine, and you can afford to produce that stuff cheaply because all your value creation comes midstream and downstream, where you actually turn the inputs into like missiles, batteries, or home electrification systems. But, I think the challenge the US has is that we are 15 years behind in trying to reshore critical minerals. So if I'm only investing in a mine abroad, but I don't have the downstream supply chain where I actually make a higher margin, you just can't compete with someone who can afford to produce that metal more cheaply because they reap all their profits in a different part of the supply chain. So going slightly off topic, but yeah, this is a question that I think a lot more heads can come together to really think about the moral as well as the economic and security aspects.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for staying on. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Melissa, thank you so much for your time. I know that I had additional questions to ask, so very fascinating conversation. It's really, really great to have speakers like yourself speak to the development community, especially seeing how much we're all in kind of different parts of the world working on different issue sets. We don't have the answers to the questions. We're all trying to practice adaptive leadership. There's, next year, this time, who knows what we'll be grappling with, but hopefully everyone who's participated today was able to listen in, was able to take something away from the conversation. Thank you for joining us. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful week. Melissa, if folks are intrigued and want to find you, is LinkedIn a good place to add you?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for making time, and appreciate the list of books and podcasts you shared with us, as well as I will pull up the latest foreign policy piece that you mentioned at the top. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, LaDon, and everybody here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And if you guys look at the chat, there's a link that you guys can click on before we close out. Oh, and Lo, thank you so much for your for also putting a link to it, to the Harvard Alumni for Global Development. I'm sure I am not part of the Harvard Alumni Global Development team, but I'm sure they would welcome ideas for future speakers. So I am just putting it out there in case anybody wants to offer a future speaker. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Melissa. Bye.
Thank you.